You're listening to the public feed of Carefree Highway Revisited, which includes only a portion of this conversation. To hear the complete discussion, become an FM Plus subscriber. Sign up in Apple Podcasts or see the show notes for details.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
I have been down in the valley of tears. I have stood on the highest peak for the best part of a week. Battered and bruised, I had pulled myself through every scene I would never repeat. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates Gordon Lightfoot's music song by song, a proud member of the FM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan from St. Paul, Minnesota, Wade Peterson. Wade, thanks for being on the show with me tonight.
I appreciate, Mike. Thanks for the invitation. I love being here. Thank you.
All right, awesome. How did you first get into Lightfoot's music?
So as a kid in the 70s, I was a little kid, and you'd hear like Sundown and Reckie the Edmund Fitzgerald, and If You Could Read My Mind on the radio. And I wasn't a fan or anything, but it's on the radio. I knew who he was. And when I was about 17, I'm walking in a record store. They still had the 45s up, with the displays. And they had the jacket. Anything for Love was the single from East of Midnight. Something like drew me to like buy that 45. And I have no idea why. I'd never heard the song or anything like that. And I bought it. And then I was mesmerized because the flip side was Let It Ride, which I loved as well. It was like another 6 weeks till the album came out. And I was just waiting day by day for this album to come out. And I bought it. So East of Midnight, when it came out in July, that was the first album I owned. And I just could not stop listening to it 24/7 for like a year. So I came into Lightfoot in a later period. As a result of that, I bought all the earlier stuff that I could get my hands on gradually and listened to everything going back to 1965. So I heard everything. That was my experience.
Very cool. It explains why you wanted to talk about this song. And you're not the only one who got into him sort of in the later years. I've had other guests, and I was very young in the 70s too. I just knew that I really liked this guy, the music that he was making. Did you ever get a chance to see Lightfoot live in concert?
I saw him 13 times. First one was in 1987 in Minneapolis, and it was basically the East of Midnight tour, so it was largely centered around that album. I actually got to see once where they did the Anything for Love with just the tape where the band went off stage and he played the backing and did it, so I was really grateful to see that once. 12 of the times were in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and one time in Eugene, Oregon. I was living there in 2001. So the last time I saw him was 2018 when he was in Minneapolis. It was a tremendous show. It was probably as good as any that I'd seen.
Now, the places that you saw him, were they huge venues or were they more theater-like?
The larger venue stage had largely passed when I first started seeing him. First two shows I saw were in Northrop Auditorium, which held about 4,000 people in the University of Minnesota. Then later I saw him either at the State Theater or the Orpheum, typically in Minneapolis, which are more about 1,500.
Interesting that you mentioned the State Theater, because that was actually the last time that he played Welcome to Try was at that theater, the State Theater in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and I believe I was not at that show because I think he did 2 nights that year. I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe I was at that show.
Now, you wanted to talk about Welcome to Try, which is late in his experience and is his recording experience. And I wanted to know, what was it about that particular song that drew you? You've talked about Anything for Love. You talked about the flip side of that, but why Welcome to Try? What's special to you about that?
The weird thing about that is that when the album came out in 93, because it had been 7 years since I had a new album, other than Gord's Gold 2, which had a one new thing, basically. When that album came out, I listened to it like continuously for about a year, Waiting for You, which is actually now my favorite record, even more than East of Midnight. The thing that was interesting is that was actually my least favorite song in the first probably 6 months that I listened to it. Only Love Would Know was the song that I really liked off that album, which I still really like. And it's just one that like sort of grew on me gradually over the years. And it became my favorite song over a long period. I can't explain exactly why. You know how certain songs are in your head? Like
Sure,
when you're
totally.
walking down the street, that's the one that became in my head. So that and Wild Strawberries were the two that kind of came in my head from that record. I was in New York 2 years ago walking down the street, and Welcome to Try like is just continually rolling in my head.
And, some songs do take a
Yeah.
while to grow on you. And I haven't done Wild Strawberries on the show yet. So maybe we'll do that at some point in the future. I think for me, it was an anthemic kind of song. The rhythm that he
Yeah.
uses with that either snare or kettle or kick drum, whatever percussion it is, you know that this is one of those that's kind of cinematic, kind of something that could be played in a stadium, or something along that line. I was kind of thinking Journey. I was thinking
Yeah.
Def Leppard. I was thinking bands that would go over very well in stadiums. Gordon's music, I've never thought would go well in stadiums, but this particular song at least gave me that sense that he had a little bit of that in mind when he was producing it. Is there a particular event in your life that you connect to the song besides the ones that you've talked about?
So when I was listening to it a lot, pre-streaming era, so you had a cassette or a CD. I was working in a retail job actually. I was in the back room like doing inventory and that sort of thing, and I would just continually play the record. I mean, I never got it's an album to this day I've never gotten tired of. It's that good. The other thing that I would say, Mike, that I want to bring up is around the time of Salute, there was a particular vocal change in Gordon Lightfoot where he sort of sang in slightly higher octave than he did prior to that. And I actually preferred the later voice, which a lot of people didn't. And so part of it is the vocal stylings that he had in that song. That's something that drew me in.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how I would describe it, but it is certainly it's a higher tone or a higher thick or it's a little thinner.
Thinner. And I actually liked that better. And I can't explain why, but that was another part of the song that really connected with me.
I think it really fits the physical shape that he was in. And when he did East of Midnight and then Waiting for You, I mean, he was getting on in years for a musician, still in great voice, didn't seem enfeebled at all, but his voice had changed. And I think that is something that happens to at least male voices as time goes on. He smoked, and that certainly did not help matters. He'd had some health issues, but I don't think there was anything we can pin down to say, okay, his voice changed because of boom, which is different from some others that we've had. Yeah, you said that you could pretty much listen to this song anywhere, doing anything under any pretext. Is that still true, or is there one setting where you think, this is the perfect place for Wade Peterson to listen to this?
Well, every so often I sit down and listen to the record again. It's never been released on vinyl, I believe. So I actually don't have the record that I'm aware of. I have it on cassette, CD, and streaming, obviously. It's one that, usually late at night, I love listening to while I'm driving.
Yeah.
It's one that I typically do all 10 songs straight through. It's not one that I want to stop. And for some reason, I think the songs are perfectly placed 1 through 10. It's one of those albums that's just laid out perfectly.
And I think some of that has to do with the fact that it was Gordon who produced the album. There was no Lenny Waronker or somebody like that to kind of say, hey, get out of the way. I'm in charge here. I mean, he did this pretty much the way he wanted to.
With his own band. Yeah.
With his own band. Yes. Not too many people guesting on this one. Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It just is. And it's certainly a group that was tight. So he could probably knock these songs out fairly quickly. I don't know exactly off the top of my head how long the recording process was, but it couldn't have been that extended. Well, the song Welcome to Try, there's not a huge amount that I could find on the origins of the song, but it said in the Nicholas Jennings book that the song, quote, details the rough and tumble of alcohol binges and sexual conquests and mentions his children and his admonishing mother. That is the sum total of everything I'd find out about the song. Do you have any other angle about how it got written, what the inspiration was, what the context was he wrote it in, anything like
I'd
that?
never heard, I mean, there's much less written about this period of his songwriting. I've never seen anything. I read the Nicholas Jennings book when it came out, and it definitely connected with me, like reading that, the chronology of his life in terms of how the song may connect. I agree. It's much more autobiographical, I think, at least the way I would interpret it than other of the songs that he's done.
I think this is a song in league with In My Fashion
Yeah.
from Shadows and A Painter Passing Through from the album of the same name. I mean, it really is autobiographical. For some reason, it wasn't quite as impactful as the other two that I just mentioned to me personally. It had a different feel to it. And maybe that was because I had heard the first two songs I mentioned before I heard this one. So I knew the story, just it was alluded to in a little bit different way.
In My Fashion is another one of my favorite of his, by the way.
Yeah, we did that one in our first season. So you'll want to take a listen back to that if you can find it. Well, that's all the time we have for here in the public feed. If you'd like to hear the rest of this conversation, along with all of our other extended and bonus episodes, become an FM Plus subscriber. Sign up in Apple Podcasts or at fmpods.com. You can see the show notes for details.